Okay, I'm here with Kevin Armstrong, whose wonderful book, Absolute Beginner, comes out on the 17th of October. It's published through Jawbone Press, and it's a real smorgasbord of who's who in rock and roll. It's definitely worth a read. I'll put a purchasing link. I'll try and say that again. I'll put a purchasing link just below this video. My first question, you've just published this book, Kevin. My first question is why and why now?
Well, I mean, the reason now is because I finished it. But I started in 2016. I started it, so I was in the middle of a run of gigs with Iggy Pop, and um, and then David Bowie died, and I felt that that was like a obviously a big moment for everybody,
Yeah,
but a big moment for me because he was big in my life, and I thought it was time to tell a story at that point. I just wanted to, start writing about it just because I realized we're all one by one, we're going to drop off the perch and there is a story there. So I might as well tell it from my point of view.
sure, sure. I mean, it's you're right. I mean, when Bowie went, it was a seismic shock, wasn't it? I had people around me and in tears about that really because we didn't know anything. It was just we didn't suspect it. It's
No, well, there had been rumors about his health and that for a while, but I wasn't I was in touch with only Iggy and Brian Eno, who would have been closer to him, basically, and but they didn't know anything. They really didn't, He
yeah,
kept very much to himself. I guess because he was working on those records the next day and Black Star. That's a lot of work. There's a lot of work in those records,
sure.
and he was obviously ill at the time, and Lazarus as well. He was working on all those three things right up until the end.
Yeah, I mean, on the topic of losing people, of course, one of my questions is that you worked with Sinead O'Connor, and of course we lost her very recently. I'm interested to know what was
Yeah.
the impression of her.
Yeah, well, Sinead's obviously, she's a complicated person, as everybody can see.
Mhm.
So I had a very good experience with Sinead in terms of she was very always very kind to me. She was very funny. She could be very sweet. She could also be, somewhat distant and distracted by her own problems. And so it was a mixed bag. I mean, musically, it wasn't the most fun I'd ever had on a tour playing her music because she wants a band to be more or less, uh, you know, invisible in a way, completely opaque, so she can just do her thing, and that's great. But it's not a lot of fun for musicians, especially coming from other things that are more exciting. But I did find it very interesting to work with her, and I learned a lot. I always learn something.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I've got to ask you. I mean, we've touched upon it already. David Bowie. I mean, how did you come to get involved with Bowie, and what did that mean to you as an opportunity?
Well, like any musician, it would mean it's more or less the ascending of Mount Olympus, isn't it, to work with someone like that. I
Mhm.
don't think anyone could possibly turn it down or say that it wasn't one of the biggest things that ever happened to them. And so since I worked with him, I've met an awful lot of alumni, as we call ourselves, the Bowie brothers and sisters who've worked with him,
Yeah.
and all of them feel the same way, a great enormous sense of gratitude having gone into his orbit even for a little while and helped out in some way. So I got the opportunity just purely by the good offices of someone at EMI Records who, you know, uh, just gave me a tip off that a guitar player was needed for this quite prestigious session, and would I like to go along? And it was as simple as that. It was just a complete stroke of luck that I just got singled out for that.
Did you know it was going to be for Bowie, or was it just a
No,
specific time?
no, we didn't. We were actually told that it was like a bit of a hush hush sort of session. Obviously, for reasons that he wasn't supposed to be in the country working. I don't know, tax thing or something, but he wasn't supposed to be here. And then nobody wanted the rumors to get out that he was here or anything. So we just were told, go to this. There'll be someone you'll want to work with at this
Yeah,
session. So go along and it'll be great.
yeah,
And it was.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've got to ask you, with Dancing in the Street, was it as painful to watch that filmed as it is to watch now it has been filmed?
Well, I mean, no. The answer's no. Of course, it was just fun, and everybody was having fun, and we did get invited, the whole band, got invited because that was the day of the recording of Absolute Beginners and Dancing in the Street. They were recorded in the same session,
Wow.
And we got it. We all the band got invited to, and crew got invited along to the Docklands to see them do that.
Yeah.
And it was obviously thrown together really quickly. They obviously hadn't had time to prepare anything, clearly. But we just all went on. We were all boozing and having a party and watching them do their thing. So no, it wasn't painful at all. It was just like, what the hell are they doing? It was just funny, and we all knew it was for charity as well. So it was a very good-natured, happy time.
Absolutely. I mean, Live Aid, of course, I mean, you touch upon that in your book. I mean, it's legendary. But what was it like to be actually on that stage? And more importantly, what was it like to be backstage? And do you have any Freddie anecdotes?
I don't really have any Freddie anecdotes. I never really met Freddie other than to just say hello and shake his hand or whatever. So, I mean, obviously, him and David were good friends, and they'd done work together. You know, they shared a studio, in effect, a Montreux studio, which I did visit for a couple of albums with David. That was Queen's home, really. And they shared a sound engineer, and Dave Richards, and so I don't know. I mean, being backstage at Live Aid, the whole of the Live Aid day was just as exciting as you might imagine it was. It really was. It was just the biggest day any of us musos could remember, because we were just all young musicians trying to make our way, and there we were on the biggest stage in the planet, at the center of the universe for those few minutes. Fantastic.
Yeah, I can imagine. Obviously, I mean, Queen's set to this day still blows people away when they watch it. But I rather enjoyed.
Yeah.
I rather enjoyed the Who as well, watching them play, and Brian Ferry. One of my favourite moments, Brian Ferry on stage. Well, was it Roxy Music or Brian Ferry? I can't remember.
Do you know what? I'm unaware of 90% of Live Aid to this day. I've never gone back and trawled through all of it, so there's very little of it that I've seen as a viewer, you know, but except for the fact that I was side stage watching Queen do that legendary set from the wings. So that was obviously a very special. And also we thought, oh, blimey, how can we follow that? You know, because it was so fantastic, their set. Freddie was absolutely top of his game then, clearly. And so yeah, but it was a very exciting day. You know, the fulfillment of a dream, really, for me. Since growing up, I'd been a Bowie fan, as had my late brother, and it was something more than we could possibly imagine to even go there. You know, just to think about meeting him, let alone playing guitar with him.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's. I mean, the reason I mentioned the Brian Ferry Roxy Music set is because, being a huge Pink Floyd fan, I was absolutely just aghast to see David Gilmour playing with them for that time. Yeah, there we go. There we go. Shine on, you crazy diamond.
Yeah, I don't remember that. Was Roxy Music in London, or was it in America?
It was in London. It was Brian Ferry. I can't remember whether it was billed as Roxy Music or just Brian Ferry. I can't remember, but I know Dave Gilmour was on there playing guitar.
Okay.
With him. Who's the Roxy Music guitarist? The name
Phil Manzanera.
Phil Manzanera. Yeah, he was there, I think.
Yeah.
Maybe it was Roxy, but so I definitely do remember that. Another Bowie question: do you think Tin Machine is kind of an critically overlooked period of Bowie's career?
Well, it's a critically micro-examined part of Bowie's career, because everybody has their view of it, and it was very divisive at the time, because obviously it was him ceding control to a band, an untried band of people around him, in a certain sense. So he was taking a risk with that, and part of it worked, part of it didn't. And I think it's like a lot of music. Some things mature with age, and they get better, or they date really quickly, or whatever. So if I go back and listen to Tin Machine songs today, sometimes, which I do, they sound better than they did then to me, because at the time I had mixed feelings about it, having been involved in some, other Bowie little bits and pieces. I thought this was a very primitive approach to music and to his songs, but still there are some fabulous songs that came out of that first record.
Yeah,
we recorded a lot more than ended up on the record as well. So there were other things that made it to later Bowie stuff.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I think he was experimenting, and he could afford to to throw the cards in the air and say, well, look at this, let's see where it lands. I think he was obviously lots been talked about this, but he seemed to be trying to lay the ghosts of a rather anodyne period in the 80s when he made Tonight and Hours or whatever it was, and he wanted to sort of flush them down the loo and do something completely opposite. So that was what Tin Machine was. So a lot of people don't like it. I can understand that. It's primitive. It's not very sophisticated compared to some of Bowie's work, but it's I think it's great, and then some of it's improved with age.
I must admit, I rather like the album Let's Dance. I'm probably in the minority there. I know it was very poppy and very commercial, but and a lot of those 80s records, not necessarily by Bowie, but a lot of them haven't aged particularly well now when you listen to them. They've got those horrible production affectations on them, big roomy drums and
Well,
things like that.
this is funny because it divides people like you and me of a certain vintage, and
Yeah,
even I think interesting album that I worked on with David and Iggy Pop called Blah Blah Blah.
yeah,
That was an interesting album because it was almost like a Bowie album in terms of the songs, because they'd co-written all the songs together, and but when I listen to that, it has dated because of the horrible clattering drum machines and synthesizers and things, and so a lot of it annoys me in terms of how the production techniques have dated. But for a lot of people, that's not really a thing. It's not really something that bothers them. My son, for instance, he's 18. He listens to a lot of music very influenced by an 80s period with certain production techniques that annoy the hell out of me, but
yeah.
some of them are cool to the kids now. So I think it's a matter of our perspective and what we heard before and what we heard after.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, um,
It's very personal, isn't it?
yeah, and but a lot of bands are actually going back and revisiting their '80s catalog and remixing it all, aren't they? To sort of give it a more timeless quality than it being rooted. I mean, the obvious example being Pink Floyd's "Momentary Lapse of Reason," but they've kind of taken it, de-80fied it. I think Gilmour said he was doing, but
Okay, I didn't know about that. Yeah. I mean,
well,
it makes sense. I mean, I think, I would love to get my hands on blah, 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 and put a real drummer on it and,
yeah,
sort of de-80fy it. But there again, things are of their time sometimes. I don't know whether it's always valid to try and revisit old work and rejig it. Some things that I've really liked in the past, I was sort of browsing in a record shop, I don't know, in the 90s or something, and I saw a copy of Cruising with Ruben and the Jets on CD, and I thought, oh, brilliant. I've loved that record for ages, and I haven't heard it in years. And I bought the CD, and Frank Zappa had sort of cut its balls off, completely, just fairlighted all the bass parts and taken away all those lovely old lush analog spring reverbs that were on the original and everything. And it was awful. I just had to throw it in the bin. I wanted the original. So I don't know whether the artist is always the best place to sort of re-examine their work or
yeah.
not.
Well, there was also in the I think in the '90s when CDs were all the thing. Really, there was this compression war. I think they were seemed to be over compressing everything, especially old albums to make them sound louder.
I know.
And I thought,
I didn't like the Stooges album. I think was it Fun? Was it Raw Power? But
I can't.
Iggy went and remixed it, and Lord
You
love
prefer
him.
Bowie's mix?
Yeah, I prefer the Bowie mix. Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, despite the fact that it's like, you know, some of these things weren't recorded under the best circumstances. People were out of it, or it was a cheap studio, or there was an engineer who was a bit dodgy, or something, and they don't sound very contemporary or, like you say, loud or anything like that. But you
yeah.
can always turn them up. Put it
That's,
on. Put the original on and turn your stereo up, and it's got
yeah.
a fantastic vibe. And if you try and make it conform to the standards of modern radio or something like that, it's never going to be as good, I don't think.
No, I mean, like my copy of I've got a copy of Beach Boys Today on CD, and it just sounds horrible. It just
Yeah,
sounds really awful. Isn't it what they've done with it? But so hopefully
very.
we're waiting for remixes of those sort of albums. And while you've got your guitar there, I've got to ask you, what's your favourite guitar line you put down for Bowie?
My favorite guitar line I put down for Bowie. Where it goes. Absolute Beginners.
Yeah, yeah,
Those riffs are mine, and
yeah,
they they're the first thing you hear on the soundtrack of the film and everything. And I think they're nice, you know, they're nice things. I can't remember. There's lots of things that we did. Oh, I know.
Yeah, brilliant.
Song Run from Tin Machine 1, and that
Yeah.
was an old song of mine which I wrote in 1980. And I
Wow.
was playing that riff one day at a sound check, and Bowie came and said, "Oh, I like that. Can I have it?"
Yeah.
So that's a proud moment for me, getting a riff of my own on there.
Absolutely. I mean, Iggy Pop said that Bowie was one of the most generous artists. He'd often give stuff away. I suppose
Yeah,
more.
I think so. I mean, he would also take things. He would take things from people, but I think he did share. He shared with me. You know, I contributed something to the song Outside. That riff is mine. You know?
Yeah.
And the whole song Outside is built on that. And that's all. Again, he heard me just playing that at a sound check and said, "Oh, I really like that. Can I have it?" And then he phoned me up one day and said, "Do you remember that riff I stole from you? Well, you can have half the writing because it's the sound, it's the sort of title track of my new record."
Oh,
So
excellent.
thrilling.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. Morrissey, is he as grumpy in real life as he is on his records?
uh yes.
Was he a
uh
difficult one to work with?
yeah, Morrissey's he's a sort of sensitive little bunny, isn't he? Yeah. So yeah, I think Morrissey's. I wouldn't say grumpy necessarily. I'd say moody.
Right.
He's a moody person, and that's not a secret to anyone, surely, who's ever seen him say anything or sing anything.
No.
So yeah, I mean, he wasn't he again. He could be charming and funny, and it wasn't so difficult to be around. But sometimes he would seclude himself away
Yeah.
uh, from people. And I did spend a sort of month with him at Hook End Manor, recording bits for Boner Drag, and the Boner Drag record. What became the Boner Drag record? It was going to be a
Right.
Morrissey solo album,
Mhm.
and then halfway through, I don't know, he got ill or something happened, and he didn't complete it. So it ended up as a collection of,
Bits and
as
bits.
you know what Boner Drag is, right? Some of his
Yeah.
early solo stuff, and then a few original songs. And again, I think I wrote 2 or 3 songs for that record.
Right.
So,
Excellent. Um, uh, what was it actually like recording at in Montreux and recording with Iggy Pop? I mean, that must have been an experience.
well, yeah, of course. I mean, yeah, I mean, I was introduced to him by David. I was just phoned up and said, "Do you want to come and play on this album I'm making with Iggy Pop?" And of course, I ran to the phone, booked a ticket, and went next day. I don't know what I expected with Iggy Pop, really. I mean, obviously, I knew him by reputation and some of the records and everything. Um, what I didn't expect was the civilized, erudite man who I met and
Wow.
who I know to this day. And so it was nice. I mean, within a few minutes of meeting, we were having a beer on a boat on Lake Montreux and Lake Geneva, and talking about Ann Arbor and the MC5 and stuff. So
Wow.
he's great. He was great. It was, again, a fantastic opportunity for me. I mean, consider those artists: Iggy Pop, David Bowie, Sinead O'Connor, Morrissey. They're not normal artists. They're not pop artists. They're really interesting,
Sure.
varied artists with a lot going on in them as people.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, I can't. I mean, you had a pint with George Harrison and John Peel. I mean, that's a lot of kudos as well. I mean, I don't know. I love both those guys really.
Oh, good.
But I can't let you go without asking you why did Paul McCartney fire you?
Well, I don't, I'm not party to Paul McCartney's mind, but I think we didn't really click somehow. And Elvis Costello told me that I'd mentioned the Ruttles,
Right.
and the Ruttles is, for those of your viewers who don't know, is the affectionate pastiche sort of spoof film about the Beatles, where they're, it's like, isn't it? It's like a spoof of the Beatles, and it was sort of partly funded by George Harrison's Handmade Films, I think.
Yeah.
And it was masterminded by Neil Innes from the Bonzo Dog Band or whatever.
Yeah.
And apparently I mentioned that it'd been on the TV or something, and that, according to Elvis, that was enough to tip Paul over the edge. And
I mean, does
P45.
Does McCartney not see the Ruffles as an affectionate pastiche? He sees it more as a piss take, does he?
Well, clearly he saw it as a piss take and didn't like the fact that I'd enjoyed it or mentioned it. I mean, that's the only conclusion I can come to with that. It clearly was offensive to him in some way. Yeah. So I'm sorry about that, because I'm a huge fan of McCartney, and I still feel it's a shame I messed that up, because it would have been a great thing for me to do. Sure.
You've never been in contact with him since, or he's never been in contact.
Well, I've seen him a couple of times. We have met since, and it's all very cordial and all that. But I don't know. I didn't last the course. Listen, these artists who I've worked with, and some I haven't. These big famous artists. It's up to them who they work with, isn't it? You get a little shot at it, and either it leads on like Bowie and Iggy to a 10, 20-year, 30-year relationship, and that's fine, or it goes nowhere. And these things are about who we are as people, as well as musical reasons, but aren't they? So I just didn't work out with me and Paul, sadly.
That was the Flowers in the Dirt album, wasn't it? He was working.
It was the Flowers in the Dirt album, and I think my performances have even made it to subsequent versions of that. There's been a sort of a reissued version with all the demos of certain songs that we recorded. They were Elvis Costello McCartney collaborations, and a few of them have got like a story. Oh, this is how the demos went through stages before they got to the original release, and I'm on a few of those, I think.
Yeah, it's a fascinating story. It's a fascinating book. I mean, these are just a handful of stories that populate this book. This is Absolute Beginner by Kevin Armstrong. As I said, it's available on October the 17th. There is a purchasing link just below this video. I would certainly encourage you to buy it, because it's a cracking read.
Right, I'm having a little signing at in my hometown of St Leonard's in East Sussex. I'm having a little signing thing on October the 15th at the Kino Theatre in St Leonard's. Right. And then I'm also trying to plan something in Heddon Street, off Regent Street. The Ziggy Stardust location where Ziggy photos are from. There's a cafe that's relocating there, and we're in negotiations at the moment about having a little book launch signing thing there. In late October as well. So watch my Facebook page or website for
absolutely. I'll put your website. I'll put the link to your website as well below this video. So if anyone's available,
Barry,
make sure you get along to that. Thank you so much for your time. Best of luck with your book. I hope it sells loads and loads of copies. It deserves to. And I wish you the very, very best.
Thank you very much. Nice to meet you, Barry.